Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Collision Live. Now 100% more not live. It's me, Daniel, your host, join you as always, and joined at the desk by the duck to my goose, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Oh, not too much. I'd love to get some ducks, actually, now that you mention it.
Yes,
Have you ever had, I'd love some duck eggs, actually. That's, they're uncommon, but apparently really good for baking.
Oh, well, I will take your word for it. I will never follow up on that.
One of these days, we'll get some ducks.
One of these days. You're looking about 35% less hairy than last week.
I did. As my grandfather would say, I got my ears lowered. Yeah, nice little trim. It had been about 6 months, I think.
Well, you were overdue, but we're excited to join you guys again. Like I said, this is the Collision Live. That's not live. I, as you're watching this, will be driving home from somewhere else on a trip. So we decided we pre-record this. This is Monday. So if anything just like crazy controversial happens on later today, that's why we're not addressing it as you're watching this. But encourage you guys, if you guys are watching this video, still throw your comments, questions in the comment section. And we'd love to talk about it there with you. And there's some interesting stuff going on, kind of piggybacking a bit on this stuff going on in culture. If you've never joined us for a Collision Live, it's our weekly live stream where we just sort of take a Christian worldview kind of through the lens of the Bible, and let's look at what's going on in culture, the good, the bad, the ugly, and kind of what can Christians kind of contribute to it, just sort of navigate all kind of these issues and just sort of have an open dialogue about that. So appreciate you guys joining us for another episode. And as we always do, we start off our show with some pop culture news. So there wasn't a ton of stuff this week, but a couple of interesting ones, especially the one that we'll get to at the very end, which I am quite excited for. But this good-looking guy on your screen, some of you cinephiles will know him, Roger Deakins, kind of the GOAT, if you will, cinematographer. He's done endless amounts of amazing movies. He's awesome. He was just knighted, which is so epic. The first cinematographer to be knighted. So he is now Sir Roger Deakins, and he definitely has earned that title. Next, we have, they just announced a live-action Goosebumps show is coming to Disney+, which is bringing back all kinds of nostalgia to middle school, when, the lucky day when you got there at the library and the Goosebumps, the new one was still there to be checked out. I pounded some Goosebumps books back in the day. Next newsy story, Dakota Johnson, known from Sam's, one of his favorite movies, 50 Shades of Grey, was just cast as Madame Web. So she'll be joining the Spider-Man universe, kind of the Marvel, but she's in the Sony side of it. It's all confusing, but she'll be featured in some Spider-Man movies. I think she's the first female kind of hero to be cast in the Sony side, at least. So looking forward to that. Another movie that's debuting, I'll admit, I'm not super excited about the movie necessarily, Shut In. This is kind of the first feature by the Daily Wire, kind of Ben Shapiro and the kind of the conservative network that they have at the Daily Wire, kind of getting into entertainment. We've talked about that here on the show. They're kind of the first kind of fully featured movie that they've created. Shut In is coming out. The most interesting thing about this movie to me is that they're kind of trying something different. This movie will debut for free, $0, 0 cents on YouTube, sort of a one-time premiere, and then they will pull it off, and then it will be available on their website, kind of behind their paywall. But just kind of a new, innovative way to try and get some buzz, let people see it. I think try and kind of convince people that they making legit films, kind of win over trust, I think, for people like me. So it sounds like maybe it's a good strategy. The next one, second to last, we have one of our favorite things that I like to pull out on the show is angry directors complaining about Marvel. This week we have another one, Ronald Emmerich, whose movie Moonfall just was released in theaters, making it ironic that he's talking about bad movies and trying to support real cinema as he releases another bad movie. But he's complaining like they all do about Marvel movies and stuff, and old people will always kind of shake their fists at the clouds. And the last topic, of course, you guys knew I was going to throw this in here. The Rings of Power, the new kind of upcoming Lord of the Rings show, just released just a ton of these posters. They're all kind of cropped up, kind of from the chest up, just sort of teasing kind of arms and they're holding different weapons and scrolls. And so, of course, nerds like me have been kind of geeking out and kind of figuring out who all these characters are going to be. But these things look fantastic. This one, on the screen. Like, take down the Mona Lisa and just hang this picture in the Louvre. This is a genius work of art. But that is all we have this week in pop culture news.
So, Daniel, I have to ask, whose hand was that featured there grasping that wicked sword?
So I'm glad you asked, because there's some debate about that. Because, again, this is featuring the rise of Sauron. But in this age, Sauron is not ugly. He is actually very kind of like the Lucifer story. He's still fair looking and very handsome and kind of seductive. So this might be the Witch King, which becomes the leader of the ring wraiths. This timeline would fall into there. Or it
certainly looks like a ring wraith hand.
Yeah, but all I know is I want that sword to be hanging at my office wall. But other than these amazing works of art, glorious posters, any of the other stories kind of stand out to you as intriguing, and why is it the Dakota Johnson?
Well, yeah, despite the fact that I'm wearing 2 shades of gray today, the Roger Deakins, Sir Roger Deakins now, that's just so epic and so very well deserved, and so I'm very happy for Roger Deakins, and I'm a huge fan of his work. So that's really
and cinematographers don't get like the cred.
Yeah, I think they tend to kind of, are in the shadows of like the directors and stuff. But like without a DP, like you're toast if you're directing a film. So, and they're the ones that make the movie magic.
Yeah, and make it look awesome and sort of the shots and kind of the eye, so that the director can be more about the performances and the story and all that kind of stuff. But they don't get, other than Deakins, it's hard to even, someone that's plugged into pop culture like me can't really think of many other cinematographers.
Yeah.
So it's nice when some kind of the behind the scenes people in movies.
And I do think it's interesting, the Shut-In. I hadn't heard anything about it, and so it'd be kind of interesting to see what that's all about. And it is interesting too that they're premiering it for free for, I guess, like limited time, 24 hours. I don't know how long it's going to be free, but
yeah, and I think it will just be like they will play it at whatever 7 o'clock Eastern time.
Okay.
When the movie's done, then it's off YouTube forever.
Oh,
so it's sort of like a public premiere, I guess, which is interesting to me because, again, I wouldn't have been necessarily excited about this. I'm not a subscriber to the Daily Wire, so I wouldn't be able to see it. But just sort of as a new way to try and kind of get ahead of the game, it seems interesting. We'll see how that works. Obviously, they're kind of going by subscribers. They don't need to worry about like box office. I don't think this will necessarily be a model that catch the new Marvel movie for free on YouTube. I don't think they'll be able to do it across the board, but it's interesting. So a lot of interesting stuff going on. I think it's, as Christians, we should celebrate cool stuff in pop culture and just sort of be aware of what is going on. And one of the things that is going on, kind of one of the bigger kind of stories, newsy things that I thought we'd get into for our first topic is the whole kind of controversy, the discussion going on about Whoopi Goldberg and The View. So this, if you're not caught up on this, if you're not, you're not watching The View every day, then maybe you're not aware of what's going on into this. This show, you have these women from different, supposed to be from different kind of perspectives, and they're talking about different issues and political stuff. And at one they're talking about, which we talked about on our show last week, kind of Mouse, the kind of Holocaust book. That was there was some discussion about whether they were canceling or banning the book or whatnot. So they were talking about that, if it's right or if it's wrong. If it should be there as sort of a way to educate people about the Holocaust. And Whoopi Goldberg kind of was giving her take on this, and she made some comments about the Holocaust and kind of saying that this wasn't about race. This is just sort of about kind of man against man, and just sort of her opinion on kind of what race is, and this whole kind of messy discussion, and kind of immediately even some of the people on the show kind of pushed back a bit, and this sort of thing kind of exploded online and on Twitter, and people kind of saying no, like the Holocaust was about race, what is racism, a bunch of discussions, kind of pushing back really across even across the political spectrum, kind of pushing back on this. So she did as you would expect when someone kind of gets caught in the crosshairs. She went kind of on a bit of an apology tour, and she was on a Colbert show, and she was kind of posting on social media, and part of her apology, that to quote it, says, it is indeed about race because Hitler and the Nazis considered Jews to be an inferior race. Now words matter, and mine are no exception. I regret my comments, as I said, and I stand corrected. So she kind of apologized. Said, hey, I didn't know, I wasn't aware. I'm sorry. Words matter. I didn't mean for it to hurt anyone and whatnot. And kind of shortly after that, the ABC News president kind of made a statement saying, while Whoopi has apologized, I've asked her to take time to reflect and learn about the impact of her comments. And kind of the result of that is that Whoopi will not be on The View for the next 2 weeks. She's kind of getting a 2-week timeout from kind of being in the public eye to reflect on her actions and kind of be punished for, I guess, saying things that the network thought was ignorant and people were angry about. So all of that's getting caught up in the story. It kind of touches on a lot of, obviously this is piggybacking on like the Joe Rogan stuff that we talked about last week, and just sort of some of these like bigger issues of free speech and kind of these apologies and as we as a culture, how do we respond to things when people say things that maybe they make dumb comments in public, they make ignorant comments, maybe they make intentionally misleading comments. Kind of what do we do with that, especially as Christians? And I think even because we talked a bit about like censorship and free speech last week, so maybe even we could focus a bit on like when someone apologizes, because it is different. Someone just doubles down, and but when they do like apologize, and say, hey, I didn't know, now I know. Thanks for letting me know. I'll try and do better. Like, is it wrong that she's still, it's like, thanks for apologizing, but like, you got to be punished still. Like, you need your time out. Like, what do we do? This seems like as our culture, there's just not a whole lot of like grace for people to apologize or to spout, ignorant things.
Yeah, well, and I think anytime something like this comes up, or the topic of cancel culture, or any of these sort of stories where people say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, we've said it, I think, every time that something like this has come up, but we are a graceless society currently, and I think that is a really big problem, because what that does is it means people are not free to sort of speak their opinions, and if they're not free to speak their opinions, they never really get challenged on their opinions, and you end up internalizing all of this, maybe bad opinions or wrong opinions, instead of saying them, get corrected, and then move on with your life. And so, like, I think this is a great example of, she had an idea about the Holocaust. It was wrong, and she learned and moved on with her life. And so I think these sort of things need to happen, and they need to have the space to be wrong about stuff. And I think that's ultimately the real problem with our society. And the same could be said with the whole Joe Rogan sort of witch hunt, that people grow over time, people change over time, society's norms change, over time. And so I think there needs to be more grace to allow people to change as well.
Yeah. And I forget now exactly which one. It was one of like the kind of these late night guys that were talking about this, kind of saying, and kind of on their show, they were saying like, free speech, we need that. Like, we don't need it when everyone is saying things that everyone agrees with. Like,
right.
There's no need for free speech or to worry about that or protect free speech when everyone's in agreement. Like, what we need it for is so that there is kind of freedom for people to say things that are maybe wrong or ignorant or just a different opinion, or like challenge the challenge the norms. Like, if we're all agreeing, then there's no need to kind of even worry about it. But like, the whole point, I think, of like allowing people to say things is that you get a dialogue. And even I kind of going on, that sounds so pompous. Even I had to rethink, but from the situation, like, from the Whoopi thing, looking into it, like, I've watched several different like interviews by Jewish people, and I read some articles just sort of on just how complex like Jewish race is, and like this, or Jewish identity is, and like, there's a lot of stuff in there that I maybe sort of was aware of, but I didn't really understand just the depth of just how complex that is, and some of the misunderstandings, and like that came because someone on a show shared an opinion, and like there was a discussion about it, and some Jewish people have contributed, and like someone like me that's just sort of like on the outside, like, and, like, to me, like that's sort of what, like, that's a good thing. That's sort of how the system should work.
Exactly.
Not just sort of like, hey, don't say anything wrong. Like, be away. Let's forget about you for a couple of weeks, and you can come back, and I'll act like nothing happened. Like, that, I don't know. To me, that's a dangerous kind of thing to get into, because you're cutting off any kind of opportunity to learn and to dialogue.
Well, and like, I think that's the thing. Like, the reason you need the free speech is because you like the things that are being challenged with free speech today may become the norms, a year from now, 10 years from now. But they may not if you're not ever allowed to talk about them, And so there's all these examples of things that, like you shouldn't talk about or you're not allowed to challenge. Like Bruno, for example. But later on, it becomes okay to talk about those kind of things. And it's because of free speech, because it's exactly the kind of speech that needs to be protected, is sort of the minority speech, if you will, that most people would perhaps disagree with, but over time that may change. And if you're shutting that down and not allowing that to even take place, whether right or wrong, then you're never going to grow and I think learn ultimately from that.
Yeah, and we've kind of talked about this when we've talked about kind of cancel culture at large. This is like, in a society that is so like devoid of grace, and like it doesn't matter how much you kind of grovel and apologize for saying some comment, like you need to be punished and you need to be canceled. You need to be feel the weight of your error, and like I feel like a culture that's so much driven by sort of this vengeance and like kind of witch hunting and all that stuff. Like the church has the opportunity to be the ones that are like, hey, she apologized, she didn't know, like she opened up discussion, like let's forgive her, move on, like that's sort of what as Christians we should be the first ones to be show grace and forgive, given that we have been forgiven for or know how much we've been forgiven by. So I do think like in this, whenever these situations kind of come up, it is just like this golden opportunity for the church to be the ones that like, are against some of this, and hey, or allow people to share their opinion. Doesn't mean we don't like challenge it or be like, hey, this worldly philosophy is wrong. Like here's why it's wrong. But I think just having more discussion is going to be if Christians, if we have the truth, like the more discussions we have where we can share the truth, then that I think is the benefit to
definitely. Yeah.
But let us know what you guys think. Obviously, it's a messy situation. It's a lot of stuff changing. It's still kind of an ongoing thing. So again, if something happens later this afternoon that changes this narrative, we didn't know. We're recording as of now. But I think this.
You want to go ahead and apologize now?
Yeah, I would like to.
For any future
we might be on
mistakes.
here next week. Sam will not be here for the next 2 episodes as he reflects on all his error. But I do think that the need for the church to be forgiving and graceful, that doesn't change regardless of how the narrative does. But let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Yeah. And speaking of sharing some thoughts, our next segment of our show, we have Host Corner. So I'm back this week. Sam shared last week, but I know some of you guys are just itching for me to return, share some knowledge on you. So I got some stuff I want to share, and it's actually one of my I'm assuming most of the people watching this show will have never heard of this guy, but one of my favorite kind of musicians, artists out there. Let's see if I can get his name right. I listen to him. I don't say his name often. Antti Martakinen. He is an independent composer from Finland. I discovered this guy several years ago, and I've been rocking his music for quite a while. So what this guy does is it's all instrumental. There's no lyrics, and he tends to kind of be inspired by like different like kind of medieval or fantasy or different kind of styles, genres. So you can see on the screen he has an album on like King Arthur. He had one that's like very folky, kind of on like the Vikings, and he's done some sci-fi stuff, and he's done some pirate stuff. And a lot of these are just sort of like kind of setting the atmosphere, and they're just instrumental. Sometimes he will infuse some metal into his albums, which always make for the best ones. So you can listen to this while you're running. I listen to it a lot while I work because it's not distracting, but it sets you in this sort of kind of transports you into some other kind of fantasy or historical period. So I encourage you, check him out. He's an independent guy making crazy good music, a lot of folk instruments, a lot of different kind of styles, but definitely if you're looking for something to listen to while you're reading or running or writing or working or just driving to work, Antti Martakinen, Google him, as I'm sure Sam will be doing.
Yeah, I already have, and titles like Hymn of the High Seas,
that's
Lords of Iron, really leaning into the Viking.
Does that speak to you?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Deep spiritual.
Oh yeah. On a very base level.
His Throne of the North, or his kind of Viking one, it was very metal themed. It's probably his best, but they are all worth listening to, and especially if you're like a creative person, like a writer, and want to kind of get into like the mood of what you're writing. Check him out.
Especially if you're writing a Viking history fiction.
If you just happen to be writing about pirates, then, hey, I have the perfect thing for you. So that's about as far as I will stray from my metal, because he's just sort of metal adjacent, a little metal tastefully thrown into his music. But speaking of other things that I enjoy, probably more than most people, is disaster movies. So we just had Moonfall, just was released in theaters this last week. I went and saw it. Not a whole lot of other people went and saw it, at least yet. This movie has been tanking at the box office. You can probably imagine why. But this is sort of a glorious throwback disaster movie. Again, we got a review on our channel, on our YouTube, and on our website. Encourage you to check it out. My thoughts, if you're one of the few people other than me that were interested in this movie. But I thought we could just sort of talk about this, because these movies, kind of like monster movies, are just sort of, every year you just seem to kind of, you get a couple of these, like, they're, other styles and stuff come and go, but you can always count on at least one or two just like total over the top CGI spectacle destruction movies, and this movie is Moonfall is exactly that. But I thought we could get into that a bit, like why is it that we are drawn to these movies? Like, what's the benefit, if any, of these movies? Like, are Christians being horrible sinners for like, sitting in a theater and being like, yeah, the moon's going to destroy the world? Like, is that, I guess not taking life seriously enough? Like, what is it about disaster movie? I don't know if you're as big of a disaster movie guy.
No, I like a good disaster flick as well as the next guy. No, I think there's something sort of innate in us to think about and to ponder what would happen, or what would we do if like the world was ending, or if like, some epic disaster had befallen our planet and half the population was destroyed, or whatever. I think it's just an interesting sort of thought experiment at maybe sort of one level, and another level is just like the odds of us seeing actual like global devastation are probably pretty slim. I mean, if you don't count the coronavirus. So I think, I don't know, I think there's just something maybe just morbidly curious about disaster movies that we just can't really get away from. Maybe not everybody. It's not for everyone, I guess, but I think it's one of those things. It's like a train wreck or whatever. Like you have to watch it. Like, you can't not see what happens when the moon collides with the planet, because don't we all want to know? Like,
and I think the kind of the underlining theme of like all disaster movies is just sort of like crisis. Like, what do we do in a crisis? And I think that's even why I'm also a sucker for monster movies. Jaws, the greatest movie, maybe the greatest work of art ever produced by civilization. And one of the reasons I love like monster movies is you have this over the top kind of crazy life or death crisis. Then you have like a handful of characters, which are usually sort of some diverse different parts of society and stuff. And like, this is sort of like a case study, whether it's a profound one or not is another conversation.
Those vary based on the movie.
Vary. Not all monster movies are as good as Jaws, but it just sort of allows you to kind of explore like human nature and like responses like of these like small people. And to me, like, a disaster movie is sort of like the global version of that. It's like, hey, obviously like the scenario of like the moon crashing into Earth is hopefully very, this out there in wild fiction, but just like the idea of some like huge, life-threatening kind of extinction and disaster, like, it just sort of allows you to like kind of look at human nature, like how do different people in the world respond to a situation like that. Like, it kind of brings out the best of people, brings out the worst of people, and I think it's just interesting. Obviously, these movies don't tend to have very like profound things to say about human nature, but it is. I think it does.
Other than just maybe reveal.
We're all
sort of a hyper way, like what human nature is. And I think the thing too that's interesting is typically there are kind of like normal people. Like, there aren't superheroes, I feel like, in a lot of these disaster movies. It's just like sort of a ragtag group of, everyday people that have to, they, for whatever reason, are thrust into this position that they're the ones who can hopefully avert or, quelch the disaster that's looming. And so I think that makes it more relatable than like say any of the Marvel movies.
Speaking of relatable, I'm always reminded in these kind of disaster movies that in such a situation, like I would be one of the first people gone. Like, I am so not able to kind of fend for myself and figure things out, and I would be dead very quickly if the moon started circling the Earth. And I think another thing, especially like a movie like this, like Moonfall, is that some of these disaster movies, they sort of like remind us. Obviously, it's a fiction, but like just sort of like how small and like insignificant humanity is, and like the grand scheme of of the world and the universe and the cosmos. Like we can kind of get almost like the Tower of Babel, where we're like we're so advanced and technological, and our civilization, we've never been this smart, and then the moon like shifts a tiny bit out of its orbit, and it's like, okay, we're all gonna die. Like,
or even just, I mean, like there have been so many like near misses of like very large asteroids. Like even in the last 10 years, it's been like we've come very close to like extinction level impacts from even just debris floating out there in space, and not to mention like the volcanoes and the earthquakes that happen. So it's like we are so frail, and I think that is a great sort of reminder that these movies bring up.
Yeah, because like obviously like real disasters remind us of the same thing. Like anytime there's like a real a horrible storm or tornado, like it's a sobering reminder of just how frail like human life is. And like like the good thing about like a disaster movie is like it's fiction. Like it's the same kind of message and reminder that we get from but with no actual deaths or devastation. So I think even Moonfall, there's an interesting in the third act, it kind of gets into some crazy, weird, bizarre evolution stuff. But before it gets there, it does sort of like one of the characters is like spouting just how perfect everything in like the solar system needs to be aligned in order. If anything's out of orbit or a little bit off, like then like life can't exist. And it's sort of like, yeah, I guess that's creationism. Like it's this perfect creation. Like that just like how perfectly balanced everything is, that like just to be a little bit off and like we're toast, the moon's.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think even just like being out in nature, I think is a reminder that like we are very small and we are very fragile and we're very frail. Like if you're ever like on the coast during a storm or something, you're just like we're just like no match for like the ocean even, and it's like even when it's just kind of a stormy day, it's just I think it's good to be reminded of how small we are and just how insignificant we can be.
Yeah, and disaster movies, they're just kind of cool.
Yeah,
there's something about seeing like a car going off a cliff as the moon's like coming over and like changing the gravity as the car's like flying. That's cinematic magic.
Spoiler.
Yeah, a spoiler if you haven't seen the trailers, which is probably as far as most people will get in seeing this movie. But let us know maybe some of your favorite disaster movies.
Yeah.
Again, Day After Tomorrow, which was done by the same director as Moonfall, is sort of a classic. And it's like, I'm a sucker for these kind of movies. Yeah. Obviously, like in the 90s, you have a bunch of like, what is like Dante or not Dante's Inferno, what is it, Dante's Peak, like the volcano one, a bunch of disaster movies. But let us know your favorite ones if you care about these movies. If you're like the majority of people and you just clearly don't care, at least not enough to go see Moonfall. And just as a Christian, I guess, is there anything wrong with seeing that? Is that sort of going against sort of the value of life to see all the CGI destruction where clearly a lot of people are not making it out of this disaster, even if you don't see it depicted on screen? Or is there kind of some lessons and some stuff that can be kind of gleaned from some of these just kind of otherwise crazy and over-the-top ridiculous movies? So at the end of it, speaking of Moonfall, that's a good segue. This week at The Collision, actually got quite a bit going on. Like I said, Moonfall, if you are one of the people interested in it, or if you're on the fence and don't know if you should see it, if it's, is it a bad movie or is it bad enough to be a good movie? I get into that in the review we did. We have it on our a video review on our YouTube. I also have a written review up on thecollision.org. I encourage you to check that out. Even if you've already seen the movie, I'd love to have a discussion about it. I love talking about movies. And speaking of our website, we also got some new articles. We're piggybacking off of it at our show, but just the most recent article that we just released just on Christianity and censorship, and kind of what is the response to Christians when it comes to sort of this culture that's just obsessed with censoring and kind of doing away with disagreeable stuff. What should Christians do even if we disagree with some of the speech? Do we allow for it? How do we combat kind of false teaching, kind of false religious teaching, all that kind of stuff? I get into that in a little more depth and kind of walk through it. So I encourage you to check out that article on thecollision.org. And if you enjoy it, let me know your thoughts. If you disagree, still let me know your thoughts. Just do so respectfully. And I'll heads up, we are planning to have another movie review for Death on the Nile. That should be
forward to that one.
Another kind of genre, kind of movie that we don't get enough. It's just sort of this like murder mystery. Again, following like the Murder on the Orient Express is the one that came out like a couple years ago. So I'll be seeing that. Probably have the review up on Friday in video and written form. So if you're curious about that movie, could you come back check that out? Anything else kind of going on?
I think that's the Olympics, I guess, are happening.
And it seems like this is totally going under the radar.
I know. I think a lot of people have been boycotting the Olympics because they're happening in China, but I don't know.
And I think even just like the time zone of like I haven't watched.
Yeah, it's like 13 hours, difference, I think, and so it's like I don't know. And it's just weird because it's we had the Olympics last year, and so it's just kind of a weird because last year was a makeup from 2020. So I don't know. But it's still the Olympics.
It's one of the biggest events going on in the world, and
peak human performance.
Yeah, you kind of forget. So maybe I'll still have time to
catch some curling.
Curling. I love me some curling. I love me some water polo too. But want to thank you guys for checking out our show. Another episode of The Collision, not live. We will be back live next Tuesday, so I encourage you to check us out again. Join us. Come, have a conversation with us Tuesday at noon, like we always do. Check out our reviews, and if you haven't done so, could you subscribe to our channel, like the page, like the videos, all that kind of stuff. Just sort of join with what we're doing here at The Collision. But most of all, guys, stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.